Just think of
we
the
go. We
conversation,
live.
and we're live.
Okay.
Welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm thrilled to have with us debut author Andrea Catalano, whose new book is The First Witch of Boston. It's available in fine bookstores like the Poison Pen. If you'd like us to hold a copy for you or put one in the mail, just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen after today's event, and we will be happy to connect you with this truly fabulous book. Now I'd like to welcome Andrea.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Thank you for joining us. My first question for authors as a reader is, what can you tell us about your life before you became a published author? Because in your case, you had a rather fascinating career.
Yes, I didn't stumble into being published very easily. Many authors don't, it seems.
Mhm.
I had been writing historical fiction for over 20 years.
Yeah.
Um, yes, and I had a literary agent for a little while with my second novel that I wrote. I've written four novels, and this was the first to be published. With my second novel, I had a literary agent for a bit. And of course, we were pitching that book in 2008, which was a terrible year to be trying to
Hmm.
sell anything, never
Yeah.
mind a debut novel.
Hmm.
So it's just very poor timing. Um, Long story short, life changes, two kids, many interstate moves, and I just happened to get lucky at the Historical Novel Society conference in 2023 when I met the author Olivia Hawker, who introduced me to her editor, who was Danielle Marshall, who was the editor-in-chief of Lake Union at the time. And so we all met at the Historical Novel Society conference in San Antonio. And it's a really funny story. We actually met in the ladies' room. And so we took our conversation out right outside the ladies' room at the Marriott. And I ended up pitching all of my books in front of the ladies' room. So it was pretty wild.
Wow. Well, you actually, in addition to wanting to write historical fiction, you kind of have some training because your academic background is in that field as well.
Yes, yes. I did pursue an academic path in history. I
Mm.
did my master's degree in historical studies at Cambridge University, and my concentration was 17th century British and American history. Um, and my dissertation topic was seeking and following the indentured servant in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1630 to 1700.
Wow.
Um, and it was while doing research for that dissertation that I stumbled across the mention of Margaret Jones. Uh, and so that's when I first learned about her as a postgrad student. And her story just always stuck with me. And I kind of filed it in the back of my head that I would someday come back to it because, man, that would make a great story, a great novel. And here we are. So,
Years later, what
yeah.
can you tell us about the first witch of Boston?
What can I tell you about the first Witch of Boston, factually or fictionally?
Um, Whatever you'd like.
Okay, I'll start with the facts
Yep.
first. What we know about Margaret Jones, who was a real person. She was the first woman tried and executed for witchcraft in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1648. She was not the first woman executed for witchcraft in New England. There was a woman a year before her in Connecticut. So Margaret Jones in June of 1648 was executed for witchcraft. The court records no longer exist. They've been lost to history. So the only sources that we have, primary sources that we have regarding Margaret Jones are from John Winthrop's personal journal.
Mm.
He wrote quite in depth about the trial. He was governor at the time, and so of course he served on the nine-member General Assembly, which held the trial of Margaret Jones. And he had a lot to say about Margaret Jones. He wasn't very keen on her, which is intriguing as well, that he would dedicate so much time to talking about this trial. So all of the charges, everything we know about the trial come from his journal. And so in my novel, in part two, each chapter begins with a list of the charges, and those are direct from John Winthrop's diary.
Oh, okay.
So all we have for primary sources, John Winthrop's diary, a mention in a contemporary almanac of her execution on June 15th, a mention in a constable's record of her being arrested and held to be observed for witchcraft in May of 1648. And we it's her name isn't mentioned, but we know that it's her because it aligns, with the court proceedings. And then the one other primary source that we have is from the Reverend John Hale, who people will remember from much later from the Salem witch trials. He was heavily involved in that, and was also, I believe, a character in the Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. So John Hale, at the time of Margaret Jones's execution, was a 12-year-old boy, um, and his parish from Beverly, Massachusetts, came for the last day of the trial. And they came and they met with Margaret Jones in her jail cell to try to convince her to come back to God and basically confess her guilt. And so here was John Hale, this 12-year-old boy, who witnessed this whole conversation between the minister and Margaret Jones, and he wrote down everything that she had said in the jail cell. So there is a scene in the book um, where we see Margaret Jones speaking to a small congregation, and she mentioned seeing a little boy who's kind of staring at her wide-eyed, and that was how I depicted John Hale as a 12-year-old. So that's all we've got on Margaret Jones. After that, there is a mention a couple weeks later in John Winthrop's diary of her husband, Thomas Jones, who was trying to board a ship for passage to Barbados. And the ship that was at dock in Charlestown was listing dangerously starboard. And they
Mm,
kept trying to readjust the ballast in the hold. There was a 180 ton of lumber and horses within the hold. They kept readjusting. This ship would not right itself. But then it was, according to John Winthrop, it was learned that the husband of the woman recently executed for witchcraft was aboard ship. And so a warrant was issued for his arrest. And as soon as he was removed from the ship, apparently, according to Winthrop, the ship righted itself. And then we never hear anything again in the historical record about Thomas Jones. So that's what we've got for facts. And so I took those and kind of just filled in the details with my imagination.
I think for someone writing historical fiction, it can be a real kind of balancing act. How much history do you include? How can you remain true to the time period? But you're also writing for modern day readers who don't want to read 17th century language or things like that necessarily. How do you find that balance? How did you find your balance for that in your first book?
That's a good question. Um, I think all authors really have to, especially historical fiction authors, really must contemplate the voice
Mm,
of their narrator, um, and think about the best possible way to convey the era, whether it be through the vocabulary or just the cadence of the conversation, but also that like that balance that you're talking about, like if we were to have them speak in early modern English, it would be lost on
mm,
most readers. So we need to strike a balance between the two. I, as a writer, make sure that every word that I'm using in the dialogue is etymologically sound, like that it's not from a later date. So when I write historical fiction, I usually write with an etymological dictionary close at hand if I have questions about any given word. And even like just like figures of speech and like little phrases that we commonly use. I'm like, oh, hold on. Did they use that in the 1640s? Like one example in the book is when the cat's away, the mice will play. And
mhm.
like, wait a minute, that might be too modern. No, it was used then, just in a little bit of a different phrasing. So I tried to stay true to that phrasing. So yeah, I really think that as a historical fiction author, you need to strike that balance. And it's up to you to find both what conveys the era, but has a good cadence and speaks to the modern day reader. Yeah.
What I love about the book also is that you do have a section in the back where if readers want to know more, you've let them know what historical sources you've used, what are the facts, how you've used them in the story. You've done a lot of research for the book. What resources were particularly valuable to you, and what did you discover about this time period that surprised you the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. Materials that were very valuable to me were contemporary sources from physicians and herbalists of the time, because I did have to speak a lot about Margaret Jones's apothecary work and herbalist work as a healer. So I kept close at hand, and I even have some of them behind me, like Nicholas Culpeper's Guide to Herbs, which is from 1640, I believe, and was widely circulated. So it would have been very possible that people in Massachusetts would have had, or an herbalist would have perhaps been familiar with it or have had a copy of it. A few other Elizabethan era herbalists, whose writings were still being considered useful 100 years after the fact. Um, so I liked to have that kind of stuff nearby. Of course, Winthrop's diary was always beside me. Um, and then things you ask, what surprised me in my research? A couple of things surprised me in my research. Well, as a grad student, it was always amazing to me to learn about the human aspects inside of Puritans, because I think most of us, as students, are taught this, we're given this image of Puritans as being these holier than thou founders. You know, and
Yeah.
we put them on these pedestals as these perfect, pious, godly people. But they were people at the end of the day, and they had their proclivities and their weaknesses and their fallibilities. Um, so that was always what fascinated me as a post-grad student. Like that's why I chose to write about indentured servants. I wanted to learn about the people of that time who weren't, living each each moment of their day according to scripture, who were just regular people. Um, they were the people who always fascinated me because we never hear about them when we learn about this time in history. So that is something that kind of guided me. And then also just learning about uh, just the values of Puritans at that time. Again, we were taught to think of Puritans as these very kind of prudish, sexually prudish people, and they really were not. They were kind of uh, very, I don't want to say like forward in some ways, but in some ways, they were somewhat egalitarian in the way they viewed divorce. Like, for example, a woman could get a divorce from her husband if he was not performing his husbandly duties. If they weren't having intercourse, she could divorce him. That's a very, modern kind
Oh,
of,
yeah.
yeah. So things like that people, aren't usually aware of. So that's what always fascinates me about Puritan culture. Um, the other thing, one other thing I'll mention that came as a surprise to me was to learn that there's two characters in the book that are friends of Margaret and Thomas's, Alice and Samuel Stratton. They were real people who did live in Charlestown, and they went on to move to Watertown, Massachusetts, and became founders of that town. Um, but it's mentioned in the constable's records 2 years after Margaret Jones's death that Alice Stratton is fined for slandering the court because she claimed they had the blood of an innocent woman on their hands, Margaret Jones. And this is 2 years after Margaret's execution. And her best friend is still sticking up for her and still angry about, the injustice of it all, of course. And she's fined for that. And it's mentioned in the constable's record that it was a very lenient fine given the gravity of what she was saying. And then a few months after that, I was shocked to learn that she's listed again in the constable's record as not paying the fine. So, and and I love that. It's like she's like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll pay the fine," and then she's just like, mm-mm. So I'm like, that's a best friend to the end. Yeah.
If I'm correct, one source of inspiration for you when it came time to write this book was that years ago, someone in publishing told you that you should write a book about a famous man's wife, daughter, or sister. And you kind of flipped that on its head with this book.
Yeah, I did. I kind of was like, that rubbed me the wrong way. And I thought, no, well, how about I flip that and write about some famous woman's husband, son, lover, whatever. And suddenly remembered the story of Margaret Jones from many years before in my graduate work. And I thought to myself, is Margaret Jones famous enough? She
Mm.
should be. This is a very interesting story and a very interesting woman. so, even if we're just looking at John Winthrop's diary description of her, so it's like perhaps she's famous enough. Let's write it about from her husband's point of view as he witnesses all of this transpire. So yeah, I kind of flipped the trope, so to speak.
Um, it's a wonderful, evocative glimpse of that time and place. But The First Witch of Boston is also, at least in my impression, a love story, a tragic love story, but a love story.
Yes, very true. Um, I will admit that I am a hopeless romantic, and everything I write at its core has some hopelessly romantic love story because that's what I love to read. So I love to write what I love to read.
Hmm.
So yeah, it is at its core very much a romance, a story of love. Love that is tested on many levels.
Yes.
Mhm.
The other thing that I kind of became aware of or was reacquainted with was how dangerous it can be for women at different periods in time. And one thing that you did that illuminated this for me was how you can look at how a woman is described in different ways. A woman, you might call her cunning, and you would think that's a compliment.
Right.
But in Boston of that era, that was not necessarily true.
No. I just had this conversation with somebody recently who was talking about how in the late Victorian era, cunning was used to like describe like a cute child. Uh,
Oh.
yeah, cunning as a word, it would be interesting to just explore the evolution of that word and how it has changed throughout history. But because yes, at that time in New England and in parts of Old England, to be called a cunning woman was a serious charge.
Mhm.
Yes.
Is that was it more of a patriarchal kind of society? Is that they just didn't want women kind of intruding or assuming their own sense of place?
Yes. I think when I think about the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the people who governed that colony, I think about men who were very, very pious and definitely guided by their religion. Um, they saw themselves perched at the edge of the known world,
Hmm.
surrounded by woods and savagery. That's how they viewed, the indigenous people that they were surrounded by. And they also were probably very much aware of what transpired just maybe 30 years or so beforehand in Jamestown, Virginia, where you basically had a mutiny break out within that colony. And so I think that they were very much aware of these things and therefore established, with the help of religion as a tool, a very ordered and structured society.
Hmm.
Um, and again, religion is a powerful tool. And, they were people of their time, and this was a patriarchal society. Um, and I feel like it's when we look at any of these witch trials, especially in 17th century Massachusetts, we see the women fall, and I'm talking like pre-Salem. The women seem to fall into three different categories. One category being women who were kind of on the edges of society, whether they were, indigent or perhaps poverty-stricken, homeless, perhaps mentally ill. They were seen as, they were not fitting into a tidy box. They were a nuisance. So there were those women. Then there were women like Margaret Jones who had a wealth of knowledge and people were coming to her, and she had a place of power within the social structure because people were coming to her seeking her help and her expertise when they were at their most vulnerable, and that's a very powerful thing. So that's another category that women would fall into who were accused of witchcraft. And the third category, I think, interestingly enough, is wealthy widows. I think of Anne
Oh.
Hibbins, who was like 6 years later. These were women who had been left large sums of money or large, land, holdings, and they were not under the control of a husband or a father. And so these were women with power simply because they were wealthy. And that was also seen as a threat to the order of things because these were women who could not be controlled and they had power. And you'll see often instances where women who are wealthy widows get accused of witchcraft, and then, their lands, conveniently get, dispersed between a few people after her execution. So, yes, all of these, these three very much a threat to the order of things in Puritan Massachusetts. So.
Let's talk a little bit about characters because you've created some fascinating characters in the book. Was there one particular character? I know authors are not supposed to favor one character over the other, but was there one that you really identified with more closely? Was there a character that gave you more trouble kind of staying in line?
So Thomas and Margaret, who are the heart of the novel, Margaret would sometimes infuriate me. I have readers who say, "Oh, I just wanted to jump in the novel and tell her to shut up,
Yeah,
behave
yeah.
herself." And so there were moments that she was such a force in the novel that, even I got, annoyed with her because I just felt like, gosh, she's just self-sabotaging herself. But
Mhm.
I must say that when I thought of what kind of woman Margaret Jones may have been, as she's described in Winthrop's diary as, intemperate, railing against the court, basically like this wild, outspoken woman. And of course, that's subjective. It's coming from John Winthrop. But if we think of a woman who stood up for herself the
Yeah.
way she does, I kind of think of a woman who, and also a woman who had a wealth of knowledge on a particular topic,
Mhm.
physic and healing. I think of a woman who may have been slightly neurodivergent.
Oh,
Um, so, like, somebody who's very well versed in a particular area of knowledge or
mhm.
expertise, and also just doesn't take social cues very well.
That's
Um,
yeah.
so that's kind of how I pictured Margaret Jones. That's how she spoke to me
Mm.
when I wrote about her. And then Thomas, um, I felt probably closest to Thomas when writing this book. Um, just something about being in his position, this vulnerable position of having to watch his wife, the person he loves the most in the world, just fall prey to circumstances and political, turmoil. It was very easy to empathize with him in his feeling of helplessness. So I felt very close to him when I wrote the book.
They're both great characters, but I have to be honest. My own favorite character was Molly.
Oh, Molly, yes. Molly the cat. Yeah, Molly was great fun to write. And she is based on my own cat who I had for many years. And her name was Moll Fluff Flanders, named after uh, Defoe's Moll Flanders, who is one of my most favorite literary heroines. And she was a big, huge, fluffy tortie with a lot of diva attitude, and but was also very loving. So she was kind of the inspiration for the cat Molly in the book. I needed to put Molly in the book, first of all, because it is mentioned in the court record, well, in John Winthrop's records, that a cat, a familiar, did enter the examination room. So I was like, okay, I need to create a cat. I am a crazy cat person, so I'm like, this is easy. And then I just decided to cast my own cat in the book. In fact, in all of my books, I do feature at least one of my cats. It's kind of like my Pixar Easter egg. So,
Oh, how clever. Um, let's talk about now you've got one book published. What have you discovered in the process? What piece of knowledge do you wish you had known or you wish someone had told you when you were first starting out as an author?
well, I wish that somebody could have told me way back when to be patient.
Mm,
It was very hard as a 20-something to have patience. I mean, it's very hard as a 20-something to have patience when it comes to anything, usually. But yes, that this is a process that you have to, if you want to succeed in the book industry, in writing, first of all, you have to make sure that you truly love what you're doing because most of us have to play the long game. Uh,
mhm.
and for most of us, it doesn't come easily and it doesn't come with the first novel. Um, So I wish somebody could have told me, listen, take it easy. It's gonna happen, but patience is a virtue. I see that now. Um, Other than that, I mean, it's just staying true to your craft, but also I think most importantly, as a writer, no matter how much you've written, you always have to keep an open mind and an open heart. And when people offer advice or constructive criticism, we are constantly evolving as artists, and I think it's super important to always keep that open mind. Um, when I first started out, I don't think I had that. I was, very stubborn and self-assured. Now I'm like, tell me all the things. I want to just take everything in like a sponge. I want to hear all of the, all the angles. So it's very important to keep that open mind because we are constantly evolving. Yeah.
What does the writing process look like for you? Because I know it's different for every author. When you sat down with the first Witch of Boston at the beginning, was it completely realized in your imagination? Do you just kind of start with an idea? Do you approach it from different angles?
Yeah, I'm usually a bit of a pantser, as they say. I start out with a notion or a little bit of an idea. So with this, I start, okay, I want to write a novel about the first woman, accused and executed for witchcraft in Boston, but I also want to write, aspects of her husband into it as well. Um, and I just kind of then take that idea and run with it. I'm not the kind of author who works with a big outline. Now, that being said, of course, when you're writing historical fiction, especially if you're writing about a real person, you need to stick to the factual time frame, and structure of their life. So that was really the only thing, that I of course religiously followed. But aside from that, I don't usually write with an outline. I kind of just take it where it takes me, or go where it takes me, so to speak. That's my method. That being said, this novel, I started this novel in 2016, and numerous things happened along the way to its completion that postponed completion. Later in 2016, I became pregnant with my daughter, and I find it very difficult to write whilst pregnant. I just my creativity just goes, elsewhere, and not it just escapes my brain. So there was a bit of a delay there, and then. Um, Also, there's a point in the story where something very tragic happens to a young child, and my child was the same age right at that time, and I couldn't touch the novel. I had to walk away from it for a good 4 or 5 months. Then I came back to it, and then COVID happened, and I was homeschooling two kids, so that really put the brakes on any sort of independent creative project. And then I came back to it in earnest in 2021 and had it finished in 2023. So as you can see, there was not really like a straight path. It was a lot of interruptions. But in a way, that was kind of good because then every time I came back to it, I came back to it with fresh eyes, which I think is super important no matter what medium it is you work in, right? Music or visual art. It's always good to come back to a project with a fresh approach and fresh eyes. So in a way, perhaps that was beneficial to the process.
That's true.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that struck me while reading The First Witch of Boston is how often history seems to cycle and repeat itself.
Yes.
And it's scary because you think we're kind of evolving as a society, but in many ways, we just go back and fall on the same patterns. In this case, the treatment of women.
Yeah.
And that's a very timely theme today. Have you had readers kind of approach you and say, this is really hitting me in this way?
Oh, countless readers tell me this. Whether it be their reviews or whether it be emails that I get. It is a constant common thread and theme through most of what I hear from readers, and I agree. It's, we're living in tumultuous times. Um, Thankfully, it's not like 1648 all over
Yeah.
again, like knock on wood. But, you know, um, I often tell people that, when I was writing this novel, one of the things that really kind of lit a fire in me to get it done was in 2022. And I was at Glastonbury Festival with a best friend of mine. It was like a bucket list item, finally checked off. And while we were there, the news came out of Roe v. Wade's, overturning.
Abolished. Yeah.
Yes, and that news just spread like wildfire through the festival. And being an American there, and I mean, of course, there's lots of Americans at Glastonbury, but majoritively, no, there aren't. And to hear the reactions and to see the reactions all around me at the festival, people just like shocked. And I was shocked as well. And then I felt shame. Like I felt, I can't believe, that this is happening. We are turning back time here. And that really, when I came home from Glastonbury, it gave me extra fuel to, dive. And at that point, I was writing Margaret's part of the novel, and that really gave me fuel. Um, so yes, to answer your question, yeah, it's shocking and sad how, history often does repeat itself, for sure. Yeah.
Let's diverge a bit and talk about Andrea as a reader, because you write historical fiction. Was
Yes.
that your first love as a reader? Are there books, authors that kind of have been touchstones on your own course as a reader and writer?
Yes, for sure. There are certain writers who have kind of like left their mark and printed on my brain, so much so that I can like, remember whole phrases from their books because they're just,
Mm,
they're embedded in me. My first love was definitely Louisa May Alcott.
mm,
Um, Little Woman, I just remember that leaving such a huge impression on me. I read it in the fourth grade and I was like, oh, I want to be Joe. I am so Joe. And so, and then not long after that, I read all of, Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables
mm.
series. Um, that was definitely, those 19th century authors were really my jam for a while as an adolescent. Um, Writers now who I admire and look up to are, of course, Diana Gabaldon. Simply adore the Outlander series. I can remember reading Outlander as a grad student, and I started it like a month before my dissertation was due. And I was like up late at night. I could not put it down. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like zapping my energy. I got to finish my dissertation. But I mean, it had that kind of a hold on me. And I can still remember just escaping into that novel and just loving it, as well as Anya Seton novels. That was the other thing I was really into at the time. Uh,
Wasn't one of her books kind of set in similar time period to your book?
yes, The Winthrop Woman.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great book. That's about one of John Winthrop's daughters-in-law. It's a very interesting story. Similar time period as well. That's one of my faves. Just thinking of like other authors I really adore. I love Emma Donoghue just because she brings this like rawness to like this like like kind of like this human side and rawness that you don't often get in historical fiction, and I really love that. Sarah Waters as well. Again, I love these books that kind of cross into, very sensual and explorations of sexuality. Like Michelle Faber's Crimson Petal and the White.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I can remember reading that and just like feeling like a bomb went off in my brain. It just blew me away. Adore that book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Yeah.
You might have some perspective on this question, but I think it depends on the author. A lot of times there are trends in different genre. There are trends in mystery, there's trends in romance. Are you seeing trends in historical fiction from what you're getting from publishers and editors and things like that? Are they still kind of focused in on certain time periods? Do you think right now we're more open to exploring different time periods like 16th, 17th century?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time in historical fiction. There's a lot of doom and gloom going around with historical fiction authors. I'm friends with many. And I think authors in general, like, we kind of thrive on doom and gloom in general. It's like just what we do best. But
Mhm.
I think that everybody kind of feels, this is the general consensus, that we're kind of at this crossroads in historical fiction. We've just come out of this, this huge there was this huge trend of World War II era novels, right?
Mhm.
Which was swell, but we got like, inundated with that. And it's almost like the market is like, what next? And we're kind of at this precipice, and all of us are trying to guess, well, what will it be next? And this is when I think, my advice to writers who are just starting out would be don't write to trends. Because gosh, you could, just throw yourself into writing something that you think, is going along with a trend that's happening right now. That is
Mhm.
maybe not what's going to be trending in 2 years. So really you have to write, I know it sounds so cliched, but you have to write the book that you really feel passionate about and love. Um,
Mhm.
and, just not pay attention to the trends because they can change very easily. The publishing industry is quite fickle in what it deems as, going to be the next big thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're very mistaken. Um, I shouldn't have said that, but it's true. Yes.
It is true.
I've been very fortunate in my experience so far with Lake Union. They seem they seem quite open to all sorts of eras and ideas, which is really refreshing and kind of nice. So
Mhm.
that's been a pleasure. Um,
Um, my next question is one I found fascinating because you do have a really diverse career resume, and one of the things I saw listed was assistant to a perfumier. What
yes.
exactly was that like? I'm fascinated by that.
Oh, it was great fun. I did that for 6 years in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh,
I was like an assistant and an apprentice to a perfumer. But that sounds a lot more glamorous than it actually was. A lot of it was just, mixing up blends, house blends, and mixing up blends for customers, and literally like counting out drops of various, notes. But learned so much from that experience. Learned a great deal about herbalism and aromatherapy and that sort of thing, which also was very useful in writing this
yeah.
book. And then I am just somebody who like scent is very important to me as a person, so it's very important to me as a writer. And so in most of what I write, scent plays a big role. Like there's very few important scenes that I write that don't involve a mention of scent, whatever it might be. Could be great, could be horrible,
Yes,
but
it could be the docks or it could be something nice.
yeah,
Yes.
I mean, and if we're writing about, 17th and 18th century, it's not going to be pretty usually. But yeah, that was a great job. I so enjoyed that job, and that was kind of my side hustle while I was writing. Very
Um, you can say as much or as little about the next question as you'd like because authors can be quite protective of their work. But can you tell us anything about what might be coming next from you?
Yeah, I can actually. I have a book coming out March 31st from Lake Union,
Oh.
and it's called The Lacemaker's Fortune. And it is also a historical fiction,
Mhm.
and it is set in 1879 New York City. So Gilded Age novel that moves. It's basically about this very unlikely love triangle that moves west to Leadville, Colorado during the silver boom, and then all kinds of mischief ensues. Um, it's a great novel. I mean, I say that because I love it. I can say that about my own book. Um, it was great fun to write. It is a little bit darker than The First Witch of Boston, which I know is kind of like, what? Because this was about a woman executed for witchcraft, but it does
Yeah.
have some very dark themes in it. And it's a little bit spicier and juicier than The First Witch of Boston. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
How can readers find out more about you and your books? Are you on social media?
I am. The best place to find me is on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. And on Instagram, my handle is a cat novelist. Um, so that's the best place to find me, and it's where I'm most active. I also have a website, www.andreacatalanoauthor.com. Those are the best two spots to check me out. So.
And if I'm correct on your website, you have some kind of links for book clubs as
I
well.
do. Yes, I need to spiff those up a bit more, but I do. I am open to Zooming and visiting with local book clubs. I do that quite a bit. So, yeah, if somebody is interested in, having me do a Q&A with their book club, I love that. It's super fun. and they just need to shoot me an email through my website.
That's great.
Yeah.
I can't believe how quickly our time has just been flown by. We've been very fortunate at the Poison Pen to have with us today debut author Andrea Catalano, whose new book is The First Witch of Boston, available in independent bookstores and libraries near you. I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in virtually for joining us, and especially thank Andrea for joining us today and for writing such a wonderful book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been great fun. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to click on things, and just in case I lose you, Andrea, it was terrific. We'll get this to you once it's processed.
Thank you so much. This was great fun. I hope I wasn't too chatty.
No, you were wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John.